I got an IT degree and this is why you shouldn't. So obviously I want to give some background. As someone who graduated with a bachelor in IST or Information Science and Technology, I'm currently working in cybersecurity as a cybersecurity analyst. So I actually first started as a CS major or a computer science major, and then I eventually switched into an IST major or an Information Science and Technology major when I was finishing my freshman year of college. This was for my bachelor's degree, and I don't want it to seem like I'm hating on an IT degree or IST major across the board. I do think that I gained a lot of good experience from my IST major, as well as a lot of opportunities along the way for internships and things like that. And at first, the main reason that I switched majors was actually because of the math requirements. I had to take up to Calc 2 for a CS major, and IST only required you to take up to Calc 1. And that was really the biggest reason of switching majors, which is kind of funny because I ended up getting an A- in Calc 1. But basically my point is, a lot of IST programs, almost 95% of the IST majors that I've talked to, they typically have started out as a CS major and then switched into IST as a CS dropout, which, trust me, is a very commonly used term to talk about IST or IT majors in general. And it typically is for two main reasons when someone drops out of CS to go into IST or IT, and that is either they don't want to go through the math requirements or they don't want to go through the coding requirements. Now personally, I was very lucky. Even though my school wasn't a highly acclaimed technical school, we didn't have like a world-renowned CS program or College of Science and Technology. I went to Temple University, for those of you who may be wondering, but my IST major at my school was still very good in my opinion. We took classes very similar to the CS majors, so I was lucky in a way where my school had a fairly decent IST program and we took very similar classes to CS majors up until I believe about halfway through junior year. And we also took database classes, operating systems, and those kind of added that extra depth for IST majors that CS majors didn't go through, which actually ended up helping me in terms of helping me find internships as well as a job out of college. However, I know not every IST program or CS program is built the same, and typically across the board, CS majors are just going to be a bit more popular in terms of that job search, in terms of what companies may be looking for if you're applying and your credential is your bachelor's degree. So unless you're directly trying to get into an IT career, I would typically prefer to go for a CS degree or even a more niche major like cybersecurity or data science or data analytics, if those are areas that you want to go into, and specifically if your school has a good program for those. Because oftentimes they may be so niche that maybe you aren't able to be as flexible with the classes that you choose to take, or maybe it's just not as well established as the CS program and you may end up being better off being a computer science major with some kind of minor in data analytics or a minor in cybersecurity, or you can always study on the side for a certification in those specific areas and build up your portfolio. I think one of the biggest cons of switching from CS to IST is specifically not having a grasp on foundational computer science concepts or low-level programming, at least in my case. My school didn't teach low-level programming to IST majors, but it was one of the required courses for CS majors. So they learned a lot more about the lower level systems of a computer, while IST was more so at the surface level, and we learned more full stack programming languages, SQL, program management, project management, things like that, which of course are still very beneficial and useful skills to bring to an employer or bring up during an interview. But even to this day, after 4 years of graduating college, I still find myself not sure about what registers are versus a stack and a heap, and not programming languages, but specifically for low-level computing. These concepts kind of go over my head, and that's something I'm trying to catch up on now, even as a cybersecurity analyst, where you'd be surprised you actually need to know those foundational skills, those foundational pieces of knowledge to be able to learn something like reverse engineering. And that is foundational knowledge that I do not have, and I'm learning from scratch now after 4 years of graduating. And I'm not saying the CS majors would have that down to a T and know all of it, but at least they have been introduced to it in a low-level programming class or some kind of computer architecture class. And of course, this also leads into lack of foundations in terms of algorithms and data structures. Now for IST majors in my school, we actually did take a data structures and algorithms class, but for the most part, it was very high level. But of course, I know not everyone is going to use data structures on a regular basis. Even software engineers at big tech companies aren't using a stack or a heap every single day of their life. And they also don't have to keep in mind the runtime of certain programs for everything that they do. But it is a good skill to have. And lacking that kind of knowledge when you're going into tech, when you're going into a career in tech, even if it's not software development, doesn't end up doing you any favors, especially if you end up realizing that maybe, hey, you do want to do some kind of coding in your role, because typically coding roles are the ones that are going to be very highly paid in tech, as well as the ones with a lot of growth in their career trajectories. Even if you're not coding on a daily basis, but even doing some basic scripting or understanding how to read someone else's code. Another thing that I've noticed is that it could be potentially hard to pivot outside of IT unless you have specific key roles on your resume. Now, I will say that I think I am very lucky, again, to have been in a place where I was able to go for a software engineering internship when I was in college, previously called the Technology Analyst Program at GP. And at the end of the day, your experience is going to have the most say in terms of the jobs you get. But I will say that when you compare a CS major's resume to an IT major's resume, typically the IT major is going to have less technical roles than the CS major. Typically, again, not everyone is going to fit this exact same mold, obviously, but for the most part, it's going to be a little bit easier for CS majors to pivot into different roles, specifically if they start in technical roles and then pivot to non-technical roles, compared to an IT major who starts out in non-technical roles or less technical, and then if they want to end up pivoting to a more technical role, then it can be a little bit harder to find those specific jobs to get into to then become the building blocks of where they eventually want to get. And lastly, while I wouldn't say that companies specifically only hire for CS majors or only hire for CS degrees, I do think that IT degrees may be slightly second choice depending on the job and the company that you're trying to get into. For example, for the most part, if you want to go into a big tech company, then they probably would prefer a CS major or computer science major over an IST or IT major. Typically, the job requirements or preferred qualifications will say something like CS degree or similar, and you know, IST does fall into that similar / equivalent category, but it may not be the first choice of the company who is looking to hire maybe a software engineer. They may choose a CS major over an IT major, which, because they may be more likely to have that foundational computer science background over an IST major. And I'm really not trying to bash on IT majors here. I do think that it's a great major, but it also depends on where you're trying to go. For example, I got a IST degree, but now I'm currently working in cybersecurity, so it kind of made sense for the route that I took in my career. But if you're trying to go into data science, and for most data science or AI or machine learning roles that you want to go into, they're going to require some kind of advanced degree, most likely, for many of the companies and jobs that you apply for. And it's not going to help. And it's not going to help that in your undergrad, you got your IT degree, and maybe you didn't take the math requirements that a data science master's program may want you to have. And maybe you had to take some extra math courses before you go and apply for that master's program, or you start at a level below a typical CS major who would have taken those Calc 2, Calc 3, or whatever other math classes that they would have taken. And this was an exact dilemma that I personally had when I was going through my junior year and deciding what roles I wanted to go into. Data science was one of the interests that I had, but because I was an IST major, all my professors / guidance counselors were like, you're an IST major, it's kind of hard to kind of get those math requirements now, and it'll also be harder for you to get into a data science master's program. You know, those are obviously very big dilemmas to have if you're someone who really wants to go into data science, but maybe you don't have the math background. And it would be a completely different story if you were a computer science undergrad and then go into a data science master's or PhD or whatever program that you want to go into. Alright, so hopefully this video was insightful for you guys. I obviously don't hate my IST major, but I do think that it slightly limited me in terms of the career options that I may have preferred to go into. Maybe in another life I would have gone into that data science program, but I would love to hear you guys' opinion on this in the comments below. Also, feel free to join our Discord channel to discuss there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe and turn on post notifications. I post videos every Wednesdays and Sundays at 12 p.m. and hopefully I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye!